I'm so excited to introduce this next guest. He's the Vice President of Development and Technology at Rodeo Effects, which is a huge company. You may have seen this name around. They recently received a bunch of Emmy nominations for their work on Falcon, Winter Soldier, Lovecraft Country, and of course, Wandavision. As VP, Jordan Souls, our guest, works in business development and oversees all technological aspects of the company, from IT to infrastructure to software and pipeline design to production and people management. Please join me in welcoming Jordan to the stage. Thanks, Jordan.
Hello, everybody. Jordan. I work for a company called Rodeo FX, as you just heard. So I think the first thing to give you a bit of a breakdown is who am I? So basically, I moved here a little over 10 years ago from Los Angeles. I was working at a company called Sony ImageWorks. I worked on a wide variety of films when I was there. My background is as a software engineer. And so moving into movies was really just because I really enjoyed movies, and that was part of my passion. I ended up working on a lot of CG animated films like Polar Express, Surf's Up, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. Interspersed with my CG and animated films, I worked on live action films like Watchmen or even Spider-Man 2. So the fact that I ended up sort of working or moving to Montreal, but ending up working on superhero films is really not, I guess, a huge stretch, given everything that I was doing before. Here's a little bit about Rodeo. That's a little bit of what we do. I can say that every frame that you saw on there, it was based on an idea or a concept that a director had or a writer put on a page, and then that needed to get translated by our artists at our studio. And a lot of the films that you see there, our artists are very, very passionate about. And it's a really interesting industry, the visual effects industry, because it is a true blend of both art and technology. And they both kind of have to work together. And in addition to all of that, art and technology, you also have a very important people concept, because you're basically dealing with a director, and you're trying to basically pull the ideas out of a director's head in terms of what it is that they actually want to be able to put it on the screen. It's a very tricky and very incredibly wonderful industry to be able to work in, because it's just incredibly gratifying to see at the end the results, and to know that that result came from a lot of discussions, a lot of artwork, and a lot of testing and failing and succeeding to be able to get the final image on the screen. So what do we do for a living? In general, like I said, we generally work with directors, and the directors really just sort of, their job is to tell you what they want. And if their desire is to go to the moon, our responsibility is not to tell them that they can't do it, but to try and figure out how to actually do it. We will have to bring, our job is to help bring your imagination to life. And that's sort of basically the context with which we try to inspire all of the people at Rodeo. And by the way, I say that in a very broad sense, because it's easy to tell that to an artist who is working on a film, but we also have to be able to tell it to people like our accountants, our IT and systems people, people that end up supporting all of the people that create the imagery, because it's really important that they understand the passion behind it, because sometimes a lot of what we do may not make a lot of sense to everybody, but it's sort of towards the greater good of what the director's vision is. So the idea for us is that we try to innovate with a purpose. So we don't just sit down and try and broadly think about ideas that might be needed in the future. At least at Rodeo, what we like to look at is the script. We like to see what's written down. We like to get an idea of what the director's thinking. And then we like to build tools specific to the project. Every time we try and build something that's very generalized, we end up breaking, or we end up building something that nobody really wanted, or doesn't have a very specific purpose. Most recently, for example, we ended up helping Quebec filmmaker Denis Villeneuve on Dune. And every idea or image he had with respect to how that world was created was very, very specific. And we wouldn't be able to have been able to create any of the worlds or do any of the work on the film had we not been able to really understand or deeply understand what it was that he was working on. And then the tools that end up helping to support him in being able to realize the vision that he had, it's just as vital. So we innovate with a purpose. So let's get right into it. Wandavision. So Wandavision was, it ended up being the very first Marvel Disney Plus TV show. And for us, we took it on because the ideas were, we were really interested. We were looking for a really creative challenge. And the challenges that Wandavision presented were really interesting. So just to sort of try and describe broadly what the idea of, what the conceit of the TV show is, we're following two Marvel characters, Wanda Maximoff, who ends up being the Scarlet Witch, and Vision. And what the director and showrunner wanted to do was they wanted to do it as a bit of an homage to TV. So every episode is reflective of a different decade in television history. So the very first episode is from 1950s. And a lot of the work that's done in the episodes are very, very deliberate, i.e., a lot of the research that we had to do was literally just watching TV from each of these decades and really understand. So, so this was the first episode, and a lot of it was on A Dream of Jeannie and Bewitched, the Dick Van Dyke Show. We then moved on to episode 2, which basically moved into the 1960s. So on this one, we were looking at episodes like Bewitched, and a lot of what we begin to start looking at too is the composition of the TV shows at the time. Not only the physical idea, like it's very obvious here that we're staring at black and white, but the 1960s was when the black and white begins to start moving towards color. We then move into episode 3, which is the 1970s. So now we're definitely dealing with color, but a very washed color, very kind of yellowy color. But again, also, it's almost difficult to imagine, but we were also dealing with square TVs all of this time and giant cathode ray tubes. So this was not really the most clear clear visuals we've ever seen. We then move into the to the 1980s. So this was very much about Full House, Family Ties, a lot of the sitcoms from the 80s. And the other thing to note too is that the way that the style of how each of how sitcoms were filmed in each of the decades was also played a very important role in terms of the composition of the show. Finally, we moved into the 90s, so this was more Malcolm in the Middle, Gilmore Girls. Again, the 90s was the time that we begin to start seeing the introduction of HD, so you'll begin to start seeing a 16:9 aspect ratio, a wider aspect ratio, as we moved away from the square TVs. We then moved into episode 7, which is based on The Office, Modern Family. Basically, sitcoms that resulted in these types of testimonials, where basically it was trying to kind of be a documentary, mockumentary type of world where we're always interviewing people. Again, we're now moving into fully HD realized life. So what we were asked to build, and again, that's literally what the entire show was about. It was basically trying to tell a story by using sitcoms as sort of the vehicle, and then being able to push the story through all of these decades. So what we were working on was something almost completely beside the point. It was and how it was described to us in quite literally an email was, we would like you guys to work on the Hex. And we were like, what is the Hex? And it was the sitcom world of Wandavision takes place in a small town. The Hex is kind of the spell that basically sits over top of the town. It's basically a manifestation of Wanda's energy. And I gotta say, after we got that email, like, no one had any idea what was actually, what we needed to do. That was, again, text on a page with no real understanding of what it is that we wanted to do. But again, it sounded cool. It was in a world that we were interested in, so we wanted to sort of explore it. So here's the actual script as it was presented to us. She sticks her hand in further and is suddenly pulled inside of the energy field. So that's what we get. What we end up producing is this.
What is it?
Some sort of energy field.
Be careful, Rambo. Captain Rambo. Watch it.
The Hex. The way to get there, though, is incredibly complicated, which we'll get into. Here's another line in it. Cut to a shot of the Welcome to Westview. Strange shimmer appears. Geraldine's thrown backwards, lands in the grass. Cars drive up beside her. Again, once again, what we're presented with, and then what we have to end up creating.
Where's Geraldine?
Oh, she left, honey. She had to rush home.
One last example. Wanda disappears through the energy field, and Monica gapes up as a patch of red growing upward until the entire barrier ripples with a scarlet glow. Here, once again, it is.
Is this yours?
The missile was just a precaution. You can hardly blame us, Wanda.
Oh, I think I can. This will be your only warning. Stay out of my home.
Stand down! Wanda! Stand down!
Super cool stuff. And basically a lot of, as we began to read the script, we began to realize that this, what we initially thought would be some simple effect, actually ended up being a character in the film. A manifestation, as we read in the very first email, of not only Wanda's energy, but also her emotion. And so what we also learned as we started reading through the scripts is that actually the field begins very translucent. You almost can hardly see it. And then we end up at the very end where it's incredibly visible. And of course, she's just incredibly upset. And so you see that as a reflection of her emotion. And so we begin in terms of trying to figure out how or what this is. So the takeaways that we always had from the very beginning was this is very much based on TV. The story needs to be told through these sitcoms over the course of the decade, and that the language of this show has to be about TV. And so what we really started to really dig into was TV. Not only TV from today in HD or glorious 4K, but HD from, again, back in the 50s, where you're staring at these cathode ray tubes, and it was just kind of crazy. And so what we always begin with is we try and take the words from the page and begin to turn them into very flat artwork. And we try and turn this around quickly to be able to determine whether, is this what you're thinking? Is this what we're going for? So these are some early concepts that we did for the hex. Should it actually come out? Should it have, or should it be quite flat like a TV? Like, is it an effect that's meant to look like that? These are all questions that we use art to be able to try and help define with the director and with the showrunner and with the writers. This one's in particular quite interesting because, as you can see, the other thing, or the other concept is that there is a world outside of the hex, and then there's a world inside the hex, and that these two worlds are very, very different and need to look and feel different to the audience. And the idea for us here is to try and represent that in terms of the nighttime and daytime look, as you can see here. All right, so for us, it's really important to get to work. And so once we're able to establish sort of a generalized idea of what it is that they're looking for, then we actually start thinking about, okay, well, how would we actually execute this, particularly considering there's 10 episodes that have to be produced. So there's a lot of work to do. So the first thing we did was we try and get inspired. So our first bit of inspiration was actually the HBO logo. We really liked the idea of how in old CRT TVs, when you turn them on, the TV needed time to warm up. And then when it warmed up, it would sort of open and expose itself. And we really liked that idea in terms of how it worked. So that was our first bit of inspiration, and honestly, that went all the way to the head of Marvel, Kevin Feige, who really, really liked it and really thought that, yeah, this is the idea, this is the intention for what we're trying to get to for the show. The other thing we started to take a look at was we needed to begin to start thinking about building a language for how this hex was meant to be built. And so one of the things we also started to take a look at was when TVs go on the fritz, like when they break, what are the things that you begin to see? Because those are the things that for us are the most obvious. And if we can start sort of piecing together a little bit of that, and people also recognize that type of a language. So we started to go and dig through the internet to try and find references for that. Once we liked that idea, we went on to eBay and we actually bought like a very old black and white TV. We immediately discovered that old TVs have antiquatedly old connectors. So immediately we wanted to pipe in stuff onto the TV to be able to content onto it to see how it actually looked. But we actually had a really hard time figuring that out. So we had to employ some AV engineering help to be able to connect everything up. But eventually we were able to get it on, and then we were able to basically start throwing different types of content onto the TV, start playing with the gain it up, gain it down. We would move the TV to see if we would be able to see things. Immediately, too, you know, we're dealing, particularly at Rodeo, we've got a lot of people that have never seen a TV like this before. They don't understand why the edges are fringed. There's sort of a fringing along the edges. There's this sort of roundness. There's a vignetting across everything. The brightness of a CRT TV is really bright in the middle, but then the brightness sort of fades off. And you've got a heavy glass that helps to distort things. These are all things that we paid attention to because these are all pieces of the language that we knew we wanted to add in. We had a happy accident that somebody dropped one of our LED TVs, and we started to see how it broke. And when we plugged it in, we were able to see not only how it broke, but we were able to see how LEDs function when they're broken. And we began to pick up on this idea as well of sort of quadrants, and that you can have hard lines, and that you can use that type of that type of a language as well. And the last thing we did was we started to play around with magnets, because the way that a magnet interferes with TVs, both cathode ray tubes, the CRT TVs, as well as the LEDs and even the plasma TVs, we were getting really, really interesting patterns from all of this. And so for each of these things, we would basically go in, and everybody would basically come each day with a new idea, and we'd be like, that's a really good idea. And then our teams would basically go out and try and buy whatever we needed to buy to see it, and then we would basically record it for reference, and we would start to begin, and then we would give it back to the client going, well, what do you think of this? Is this the type of, does this speak to you in terms of how you would think that the hex should begin to act? The other thing we started to take a look at too was artwork. We have a lot of people that are very into art history, and so we started to take a look at artwork and how artists represent things, and to be able to sort of take ideas from art and artists, and to be able to see whether or not any of those ideas actually begin to yield some of these interesting results. So let me break down one of the shots, because I'll be able to show you some of it. So this right here is the town of Westview. This is completely computer generated. This is 100% CG. That's what it looks like. We threw a sky in, fully CG town. The first thing we do is we start layering on some of the language that I was showing you before. For example, here we're beginning to see, remember when I showed you those magnets before, where we're beginning to see some of those magnetic patterns, and we layer that on top. And then we distorted a little bit in terms of the CRT TVs, where they were sort of distorted because as they get brighter at the beginning and then a little rounder at the edge, so we would distort that. Then we would add in from those LED screens that I showed you before, some of the sort of very horizontal patterns that were going into that. And then we would again fringe it so that it would actually not be, so it wouldn't look so bright, and it would actually, the brightness would fall off as you were getting towards the edge. This is what was filmed on the screen. So as you can see, the performer and nothing else. And then this is the sort of end result. And what I'm hoping you're able to see is a lot of the work and a lot of the experimentation and a lot of the building up of the language you should be able to see in this image here, from the experiments that we did on CRT TVs to LED TVs to everything. Here's the final shot. So the idea is that the effect is really meant to be very subtle. However, it should also tell you something. The language here should speak to you a little bit in saying that there's something about it being in TV, because that's the conceit of the show, is that they sort of lead you towards that. All right, so the next breakdown would be of the second shot, or sorry, the last shot I had shown you before, of her emanating from a much larger version, a much more visualized version at that point in time, because she's a little bit upset. So again, you see all of the vertical lines that we were working on before from the experimentation that we did with the LED TVs. And then we start sort of integrating her in. We start brightening everything up. We start adding chromatic aberrations. So at this point, we're adding in, sometimes we notice, particularly with the magnets, that they would sort of bring about a much richer red, green, and blue towards where the magnet is. So we'd add that in. And then we put it all together. Oops. Oh, let me go back. There we go. So that was the final shot. The whole series ends basically at the very last episode, where we begin to see how this whole thing began at the very beginning. And what's interesting is that a lot of the language that we had to build in to this show and to build into the character of the Hex ultimately gets exposed at the very end, as we begin to see not only is it a manifestation of her, but hopefully a lot of the language that you were sort of seeing, or I was able to show you in the last few slides and the breakdowns, you begin to see in terms of how the actual town itself got built and how we began this entire series to begin with. So it was a kind of a clever way to wrap it up. VFX can be tricky, particularly VFX that needs to be it actually needs to be exposed. Like, we're not trying to hide it from you. We're not trying to be completely invisible. We actually need you to be able to pay attention to it, but it also needs to feel like it sits in the environment correctly. Like, you're not taken away from it by the VFX. And to be honest with you, for a show like this, with all of the creative challenges, we actually ended up being very successful at it, which we were quite happy about. And we were happy to get the recognition as well for how tricky it was. And on top of all of that, this particular show happened to be the very first one that Marvel put out on the Disney Plus network. So there was really just a high expectation for this show, and given the high concept that it had, it just needed to work, and the reception to it was fabulous, and we were really excited to play a part of it. Here's all of our work in it, because obviously we did more than just that.
Careful, Rambo.
You're definitely not my friend.
So that's WandaVision. Obviously, we worked on a lot of it, and it was a really fun project to work on. I could probably talk about it for hours or talk about any of the other Marvel projects that we worked on. We're very fortunate that this project actually happened to finish filming right before the pandemic hit. So we actually, the filming was all done, so we were able to take our time and make it great. I could talk more, but I think maybe that's probably it for me. So thank you very much. I hope that was somewhat informative about the creative process that we used to make WandaVision.
So much. Do you have time to stay for questions from the audience?
No problem.
Awesome. That was incredible. That was incredible. So fill up the Slido, people. I know there are already questions from the chat, but right off the top, I just wanted to say congratulations to everybody at Rodeo for your huge Emmy nods. That's incredible, especially in a pandemic year. So huge round of applause. This is like so exciting for you.
Thank you.
That must have felt so gratifying after a tough year to sort of get all of these, all of the recognition.
It's been for our team and our artists who put a lot of time into everything. It was very gratifying, and for a year that we had to pivot very quickly, as did everybody else, it was it was incredibly. It was a huge honor for us to get 3 Emmy nominations, and to be honest with you, all the work that we did, we really enjoyed. So
good. Okay, I'll ask you more about your workflow in a minute, and I'll get to some of these questions. We have a question here talking about sort of how long it took you after shooting to actually produce all of these VFX, just to give a sense of timeline, like how much work and time did it take to deliver on that after shooting?
it's a good question. I'd say we began the conversation with the team back in early 2019.
Okay.
And so we were flying back and forth between Atlanta, which is where they were shooting the series, and going back to Montreal. And we started to really begin to try and think about how we were going to execute it. Then they started filming it, and that took a while. So all said and done, probably a little bit under 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. You know, what struck me when you were giving your presentation is that you really studied all of these eras of storytelling throughout the ages, and I'm curious if you yourself found a through line or you have any insights about what makes amazing television that you can share with the other storytellers in the room.
We found that generally speaking, the stories that work are the ones that really connect with the audience. And so we've worked on a lot of films that are very high concept, but then end up going nowhere. And then ones that are very simple and are telling a very simple story that people can kind of relate to. And people just seem to really, move towards those types of projects. So, and it's really good if you have a filmmaker who kind of knows what it is that they want. We've been in a lot of rooms often where filmmakers just aren't able to express themselves. However, that sort of ends up being the bigger challenge for us, because the idea for us is, as artists, is that we need to be able to get into the filmmaker's head and try and figure out what it is that they want. And that process is just as exciting as actually making the thing.
Okay, that's very cool.
Yeah.
Somebody is asking here about, with such a massive creation, what happens inside of that initial meeting? Like, what is the energy like when, you've got the brief from WandaVision? What's the first meeting like on your team?
Yeah, I mean, the first meeting is a bit, it's both exciting and terrifying at the same time. You're basically listening to somebody try and describe to you what it is that they want. You're nodding your head, thinking that you understand what it is, but knowing full well that you probably have months ahead where you're going to really go left and go right before you finally sort of figure out what it is that they actually want. And in addition to all of that, you have a studio who says, okay, cool, but you need to be done on this date. And the interesting part of visual effects or the film or TV industry is, and having worked in software, I can at least speak to that, is that there's a very hard deadline. Movie comes out, TV shows come out. It's an immovable deadline, and you need to get done in that period of time. So ultimately, you want to put the best creative product out there, but you also need to make sure that the product is actually out there. So there's really not a lot of there's not a lot of delays.
Okay.
The deadlines are very real, and the pressure is very real in that respect. However, it's artistically driven.
Right.
So you need to also give time for the artists to be able to explore and to be able to bring ideas to the table. And Marvel's very much about the best idea always wins, almost irrespective of the time or irrespective of the money. They're a studio who invites change in at the very end, and they're willing to make a change to it if it helps serve the story. And time and time again, a lot of the work that they do really does hit it.
Okay, great. I like that idea of creative constraint, but maybe it also sort of the pressure pushes some of the creativity forward a bit. We have a lot of questions here about, what is it like to work with filmmakers and these huge, huge names, HBO, Marvel. Do you have a favorite filmmaker that you have worked with? Anna is asking this question.
I see, of course. To be honest with you, not really. I mean, at this point, we do work with a lot of people, and everybody brings this different challenge. I mean, when we were working on Game of Thrones, just the excitement of being involved in a show like that was enormous. When we moved into like Stranger Things, we just, how can you not get taken away by being part of that world and helping to create it? And then in some of the films that maybe didn't do so great, like working with Luc Besson on Valerian, but taking that comic book that was something that he's been dreaming of since he was a kid and turning it into something real. Like to capture his excitement is incredible, and then to translate that to today, I mean, that was the same excitement that Denis Villeneuve brought when he started to work on, when we finished work on Blade Runner and started to help him visualize the world of the world that he imagined as a 14-year-old boy reading Dune onto the page.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just for anybody who is an artist or a person who really enjoys a good story. Those are really those are the moments that you really get to enjoy.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's hard to pick a favorite because you've worked with so many amazing projects too. Yeah,
we try and diversify, but at the same time, not everything can be a winner. But what we try and do is we try and find projects that inspire us and will hopefully help to inspire our artists. And that's actually a very important idea for us, because a lot of stuff does come to us, and we really do try and find the things that we think would resonate with our artists. They're ultimately craftsmen.
Yeah.
And to get the best out of them is when they're inspired, when they're excited about something. And I see that at the studio across sort of all areas, which is quite fun.
Okay, I have a couple questions here that are about just that, the creative side of it. One is asking, it sounds like you need to really balance creativity with project management. And especially during the pandemic, how do you manage to do this and keep that fire alive in your creative team?
Hard.
It's hard, eh?
Hard, yeah.
People management, yeah.
Oh, it's enormous. I mean, artists are very passionate people, and put them in a room together, and you get explosions of creativity and explosions of interesting behavior and emotion, all driven towards the central idea of trying to make something better. Add to that sort of a remoteness, and it definitely is difficult. It's hard to build that out, but everybody does persevere, and we've spent like the last 2 years figuring out how to kind of get it done. So it does exist, it does work. It just requires a bit more commitment from everybody to communicate better
Right.
and to communicate more often.
Right.
Yeah.
I have another question here from someone who's curious, I guess, in the creative space. And what are the 3 skills or the top skills and attributes you look at when you're looking to hire a creative person on your team, or even a student who's coming out of school? How can they get recruited? What kind of skills or attributes make them stand out?
I think the very first question we tend to ask is, hey, so what's your favorite film or movie? What and why?
one.
I mean, the reality is, it's we that's what we do every day, and we do it for long hours a day. So if you love what you're doing, then you're very likely to do it well. So if you enjoy the content that's put out on TV, or you really enjoy a film, we know, irrespective of all of your other skills, you're gonna come to work every day excited and eager to try and help out. And for us, the challenges are enormously varied, from being incredibly creative to incredibly technical, to our accountants, to our HR people,
Right.
to the people that are, that are tying wires under desks. Like, all of these people, the one common denominator that we try and have in our studio is all these people are really interested in the product that we're creating. And we find that passion, irrespective of the department, feeds into the company in general. And that is a culture that we really focus very, very hard on.
And you know what? It translates on screen. I have to say, you can definitely tell from what's produced at the end of the day.
And what's produced at the end of the day, for the most part, is ripped out of the artist's hands, because they would just continue to work on it for months on end.
Right. Okay. Unfortunately, well, actually, we have time now. I saw for a couple more questions. This one I really like. What is the next big idea in VFX? What do you see in terms of, is there a high competition between different studios to drive R&D effectively? Like, where do you see it being pushed even further in the short term?
Well, that's a good question. There are some pretty low-hanging fruit that I'll reach out for. So the pandemic really pushed forward the concepts of virtual production, which is basically taking these large LED screens and building and helping to build, instead of a green screen, instead put the content on these LED screens and have them just sort of function as being an extension of the environment that you're in. Mandalorian does this incredibly well. There's lots of films that sort of are utilizing the skill. The conceit of all of that is that you have enough time before you go to camera to build it all.
Right.
Reality is that actually rarely the case. So you try your best to get everything onto the screen. So virtual production requires the movement of the visual effects process from being a post process to being very much a pre-process. So suddenly you've got to manage that. That is turning into a very lucrative skill to have, and they're generally speaking driven by game engines. So you also have to have a really good understanding of how game engines work, and then just the functionality of how you make these screens work, how you get everything to sort of to look as seamless as possible. That's a big technical challenge.
Okay. I have a question here that sort of relates to this. It's about the difference in your work during production and filming and in post-production. Like, talk a little bit about what the different maybe management challenges are, or what the different or exciting opportunities are, or is there a part that you prefer to work on? It's just...
When you read the words on the page, it's really interesting, right? So in your head, you begin to start piecing together what it is that you want. Then you get into the world of drawing it out. And in some cases, if you're going to film on location, maybe you go to Google Earth and you're able to sort of figure out the actual location and then maybe draw into it to figure out what that set would look like. And then on the day of shooting, there's a sandstorm.
Right.
There's, you know, there's a prosthetic that somebody was meant to wear that he decided he doesn't like, the actor decided he doesn't like, and so he's not going to wear it. And so the function of what you actually film on the day and what you're preparing to film a few weeks or months before versus what was written on the page can really be vastly different.
Okay.
And the job of the VFX supervisor is to basically be nimble enough to be able to go, okay, got it. We'll pivot. We'll figure out some other means. We were working on Jungle Cruise, and we needed to get a ton of footage, which we sent. We had a drone in Montana, and it was shooting beautiful images of Montana lakes and waterfalls, and we were like, this is going to be perfect for us. We'll be able to just use that. And then suddenly, we lost connection to the drone. And then suddenly we watched the drone just go straight down, hit the river, and go over the waterfall, and we lost everything.
Oh no!
And of course that ended up turning into, okay, so now we have to completely do it in CG. It's okay, you know, like these are the things that sort of happen, and these are the challenges that we get, but over the course of, from a script to when you finally, when the director's finally cut what he wants, and then you have to add everything at the end, it can be so different.
Yeah.
And the work that you expected at the beginning can tends to grow a lot larger, and the ambition of the director is still something that you're trying to hit.
Yeah.
But of course, the longer that they take, let's say, to cut it, the shorter you have to make it.
Yeah.
So then you move into the world of being working creatively to try and figure out a means of being able to do that. That requires a lot of project management and client management.
Yeah.
And a high technical skill set in terms of we might not even be able to get this done, so we might need to use the cloud, for example,
right,
to burst into to be able to actually get everything done. It's a when I say it's a very varied skill set across the visual effects studio, it really is.
Yeah, it sounds complex.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you so much.
Sure.
I don't know if you want to say just a final word about what's next for Rodeo, or what you have coming, or where people can follow you, find you. I'm rolling out the red carpet for you as an outro.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, we're rodeofx.com is the website, and what are we working on now? We're in the middle of the next season of Stranger Things. We're working on Lord of the Rings, the TV series.
Yes.
We're about to start in on Mission Impossible 7. We're wrapping up Fantastic Beasts 3.
Oh my gosh.
We just finished Foundation series, and we're just about to start in on, they just greenlit Dune 2. So that'll probably be starting up at some point soon too. So just fun challenges all around.
I cannot wait to watch it all. Thank you so much, Jordan, for coming to Campus Party Canada. It's been so delightful to talk to you. Let's get a round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.